Anon raced through the gates of Kelm as smoke rose in the distance. The sounds of battle echoed, clanging swords, terrified screams, anguished cries. His heart pounded as his legs churned faster. Kara. He had to find Kara. When the gates of the Tisser estate came into view, his worst fears were realized. Bodies littered the ground, soldiers in the red and gold livery of House Kelm, but Tesser soldiers as well. Anon swallowed hard, a knot forming in his throat. He couldn't see Kara. A roar shook the air, and a blast of fire shot into the sky. Anon squinted against the searing light to see a massive figure in black armor hovering above the ground, flanked by a dozen soldiers. The Duke. Rage boiled in Anon's veins. He raced forward, hands curling into fists, as a battle cry tore from his lips. The Duke turned, eyes widening behind his helmet. "You..." Anon slammed into the nearest soldier, fist crackling with mana. The soldier flew backward with a scream, crashing into the wall of the estate. "Impossible," the Duke growled. He raised a gauntleted hand, a ball of flame erupting from his palm and hurtling toward Anon. Anon deflected the fireball back, the air shimmering around his hands. "Surrender now, or face the consequences," the Duke hissed. "Never." Another blast of fire. Anon caught it and flung it aside, the fireball exploding against a tree. His heart pounded in his chest, but not from exertion, from rage, from fear for Kara. He would end this, once and for all. The remaining soldiers charged, swords drawn. Anon swung his arms out, a pulse of mana rippling through the air and slamming the soldiers back. They tumbled across the ground, unmoving. The Duke stared at the fallen soldiers, disbelief etched into every line of his body. How did you... "Your tyranny ends today," Anon growled. He flung a blast of mana at the Duke, who raised a hasty shield. But it wasn't enough. The Duke cried out as the force of the blow threw him from his feet, armor crashing to the ground. Silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the crackling flames and Anon's ragged breaths. They had won. Kelm was free, and Kara. A faint groan caught his attention. He whirled to see Kara pushing herself up from behind an overturned wagon, clutching her arm. Anon ran to her side, dropping to his knees. "Kara!" Her eyes fluttered open, pale and pain-filled. But when she saw him, her lips curved into a weary smile. "You came." Anon gripped her uninjured arm, relief flooding through him. "Of course I came. I will always come for you." Kara's smile widened, then faded as she caught sight of something over his shoulder. Her eyes went wide. "Anon, behind you." He spun around, a blast of mana already gathering in his palm, but too late. A sword pierced his side, sliding between his ribs. Agony exploded through him as he stumbled back, clutching at the hilt protruding from his body. The Duke pulled the sword free, eyes burning with hatred. "You'll pay for this, boy." The Duke swung again, but Anon flung out a pulse of mana, throwing the Duke across the courtyard. He crashed into a wall, armor denting from the impact, and slid to the ground, motionless. Anon grit his teeth against the pain, fighting to remain standing. He couldn't collapse. Not yet. There were still enemies left, and Kara. "Anon!" Kara caught him as his knees buckled, easing him to the ground. Her eyes were wide with panic as she pressed her hands to his side, trying to staunch the flow of blood. He winced, the pain nearly unbearable, but forced a smile. "It's all right," he said, though the words came out strained. "We won." Tears filled Kara's eyes. She shook her head. "You can't leave me, not after everything you've done." Her hands trembled against his side, covered in his blood. Anon lifted a hand, brushing her cheek. His vision was dimming, but he could still see her, could still feel the softness of her skin under his fingertips. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, though he knew deep down that it was a lie. He had given everything to protect her, to free Kelm, and now there was nothing left. The ancient mana construct appeared above him, its voice tinged with sorrow. "I'm afraid he has overdrafted his mana. There is nothing I can do to save him." Kara stared at the construct, eyes wide and horrified. Then she looked back to Anon, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't." Anon smiled up at her, squeezing her hand. "It's all right," he said again, struggling to speak. His eyes fluttered shut for a moment before opening again, finding her gaze. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." His eyes closed again, darkness overtaking him. The sounds of the courtyard faded away, replaced by a deep silence. And then, softly, "Anon?" Kara's broken whisper followed him into the dark. Anon opened his eyes. The courtyard was empty, littered with debris and the remnants of battle. His body ached, every muscle protesting as he pushed himself up onto his elbows. But the pain was dull, as if muffled somehow. He blinked, confused, before realizing his mana levels had replenished. Somehow, impossibly, he had survived. "You're awake." Anon turned at the sound of Kara's voice. She was standing in the doorway of her family's estate, dressed in mourning black. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. He stared at her, stunned into silence. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "You didn't think you'd get rid of me that easily, did you?" Kara let out a broken sob and ran across the courtyard, throwing herself into his arms. Anon held her close, relief flooding through him. He was alive. She was safe. They had survived. When Kara finally pulled away, wiping at her eyes, Anon glanced around the courtyard again. "Where's everyone?" "Preparing for your ceremony," Kara said. She took his hand, helping him to stand. "After what you did, saving the city and defeating the Duke, you're being inducted as an elder. You'll help govern Kelm and have a say in all matters of the family." Anon stared at her, stunned. "But I'm not actually part of the family. I'm just a servant." Kara shook her head. "Not anymore. You're one of us now, Anon. And it's time everyone recognized that." She squeezed his hand, smiling up at him brightly. "Welcome home." Anon rushed to Kara's side, checking on her well-being and ensuring she was safe. He breathed a sigh of relief to find her shaken, but unharmed, her eyes still red from crying. "I'm all right," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "Thanks to you." Anon pulled her into an embrace, the tension finally leaving his body. She was safe. The battle was over. A throat cleared behind them, and Anon turned to find the leader of the Teaser family approaching. The man inclined his head in a bow. "On behalf of my family and the city of Kelm, I wish to express our deepest gratitude for your actions today," he said. "You saved us all." Anon shook his head. "There's no need to thank me. Protecting this city and Kara's family is all I've ever wanted." The leader smiled. "Be that as it may, your power and skill were invaluable in defeating the Duke. You have earned your place here as an elder of this family and a protector of this city. Kelm is in your debt." Shock rippled through Anon, swiftly followed by pride. He had proven himself, not just as a servant, but as a leader. He would help guide this family and this city into a new era of peace. He bowed low before the leader. "I accept this honor humbly and vow to serve the Tesser family and the people of Kelm to the best of my ability." The leader clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Of that, I have no doubt. Now come, we have much to discuss regarding the future of this city and your role in it." Anon glanced at Kara, who smiled and nodded. Taking a deep breath, he turned to follow the leader, ready to embrace his new responsibilities. His journey was far from over, but for the first time, he knew exactly where he belonged. Anon took a deep breath and steeled himself as the leader led him away, his body trembling with the strain of the battle. He had given everything he had to defeat the Duke, pushing his abilities to the limit and beyond. Now, his mana core throbbed in protest, waves of pain radiating through his body with every step. He gritted his teeth against the agony, struggling to maintain a stoic expression. He would not show weakness, not now. The Tisar family was depending on him, believing he was strong enough to guide them into the future. He had to prove them right. By the time they reached the manor, Anon's vision was starting to blur. He wavered on his feet, blinking hard to remain conscious. The leader glanced at him in concern. "Are you unwell?" Anon shook his head, then thought better of it as a fresh wave of pain lanced through his skull. "Just the strain of the battle," he said through clenched teeth. Understanding dawned in the leader's eyes. He turned to the rest of the family, his voice ringing with authority. "Our savior needs time to recover his strength. The discussions can wait until tomorrow." There were nods and murmurs of agreement all around. Anon sagged in relief, gratitude flooding him. The leader clasped his shoulder. "Rest now and heal. You have earned it." Anon managed a tired smile. "Thank you." With the last of his energy, he transported himself to his room, collapsing onto the bed. As darkness overtook him, he heard the ancient mana construct's voice in his mind. "Rest now, my friend. You did well today." Comforted by the familiar presence, Anon let go of consciousness, trusting that he was safe here, and knowing that, for the first time, this was truly his home. Anon awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, he was disoriented, confused by the lavish surroundings. Then, memory rushed back in a flood. The battle, his new status, the mana construct's voice. He sat up slowly, assessing his body. The piercing pain in his head had dulled to a faint ache. His muscles felt sore, but no longer trembling. He would recover in time. Rising from the bed, Anon went to the window and gazed out at the city below. Parts of it were still damaged from the attack, plumes of smoke marring the skyline. But the fires had been extinguished, and citizens had emerged from their hiding places to begin cleaning up the rubble. Kelm would heal, just as he would, and he would help it heal in his new role as elder. The thought filled him with determination and purpose. He had been given a great gift and an even greater responsibility. He would not squander it. With a sigh, Anon turned from the window and began to prepare for the day. There were discussions to be had, plans to make, a city to help rebuild. The challenges ahead were many, but for the first time, he felt ready to face them. He had found his place here, and a family to stand beside him. Together, they would shape the future of Kelm. Anon walked through the halls of the Teaser estate, nodding to servants and guards alike. They greeted him with smiles and bowed heads, a sign of respect for his new position. He still felt uneasy with the deference, but appreciated their trust in him. He found Kara in the gardens, sitting on a stone bench and gazing at the flowers. At the sound of his approach, she looked up, her face lighting with a smile. "How are you feeling?" she asked, standing to meet him. "Recovered, thanks to you." Anon took her hands in his, giving them a gentle squeeze. "I owe you my life in more ways than one." A blush stained Kara's cheeks. "You owe me nothing. I'm just grateful you're still here." Her expression turned serious. "There are difficult times ahead. My father wants to meet with the city council later today to discuss rebuilding and establishing new defenses. He wishes for you to join us." Anon nodded. "Of course. I gave my word to protect the city and your family. I intend to keep it." "I know you will." Kara leaned up on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. "Just take care not to push yourself too hard. You're still recovering your strength." "I'll be careful." Anon smiled, tilting his forehead against hers. "You needn't worry. I have too much to live for now to take unnecessary risks." Kara's answering smile lit her whole face. "Good. The future of Kelm depends on you, Anon, and so does my happiness." "Then the future is bright indeed," Anon said, and together they walked to face it. This is the end of chapter